Subject tonight is fossils, fact and fiction. And let me say straight away, I do believe in fossils. They were not planted in the rocks by the devil to deceive the faithful. They are real. So what do we make of these fossils? Well, here's an outline. Well, actually, before we get going, here's something I found on the internet, which I thought was rather amusing. Evolution. We have the fossils. We win. Well, who's we? Obviously, evolution. Well, who has the fossils? Well, the fossils don't belong to the evolutionists. They belong to everybody. As it's been said before, there's not evidence for evolution and evidence for creation. It's the same evidence. It's just how we interpret it. So we're going to have a look at the fossils. And here's an outline of what I'm going to say. We're going to have a quick overview of the fossil record, what's actually there, some broad brush, if you like, of the features of the fossil record, and some of the patterns in the fossil record. Of course, we can't talk about fossils without discussing transitional fossils. What are transitional fossils? Do they exist? What do they mean? But I also want to point out some rather surprising things in the fossil record to do with advanced features which we observe in some fossils. And a quick survey of some living fossils. It has to be quick because there are so many. What do they mean? And then finish off, we'll get a bit technical at the end with disparity and diversity in the fossil record. And then we're going to look at just to finish, some predictions and see which model actually fits the predictions or makes the best predictions about the fossil record. All through this talk, I'm going to be talking about millions of years. I'm going to use the evolutionary timescale for convenience sake, just to make it simple, because the evolutionists attach various ages of millions of years to the various fossils, and I'm going to carry on with that story just for convenience. The sequence I'm happy with. The timescale I do not agree with. I'll say right up front, I do not agree that they are millions of years old, but I'm going to use the millions of years timescale just for convenience sake. And I generally accept the rocks and the descriptions of the rocks in the fossil record, in the geological column, as being correct. It's the ages I have a problem with. But we're not going to talk about that tonight, so we're going to make a few assumptions, but work within that framework and see what conclusions fall out when we actually look at the evidence. And just a reminder here, all the images are either from Wikipedia Commons or in the public domain on my own work, unless otherwise attributed. We're going to start off with some quotations by evolutionists. And before I get accused of quote mining, I'm going to try to put them in context and represent what they're saying correctly. I'm not trying to use them as enemies to their own theory, but I want to give you a taster for what evolutionists have said, starting, of course, with Charles Darwin, who spoke about the fossil record because he was looking for evidence for his theory of evolution, although he did not call it evolution at that time. And he said this: "Why do we not find innumerable transitional forms embedded in countless numbers in the crust of the earth? Geology assuredly does not reveal any such finely graduated chain, and this perhaps is the most serious objection which can be urged against my theory." That's what Charles Darwin said when he wrote in 1859 his famous book, Origin of Species. And he realized there was an issue here. And he made a prediction that as time went on, people would discover fossils that would actually validate his theory, which is a fairly reasonable way to proceed. He's got a theory, he's got certain evidence which he thinks shows his theory is accurate. He says, well, I'd like to have some fossil evidence as well, and it will be shortly coming. Let's jump right forward to 1983, and this is a quote from another well-known evolutionist. "The extreme rarity of transitional forms in the fossil records persists as a trade secret of paleontology. The evolutionary trees that adorn our textbooks have data only at the tips and nodes of their branches. The rest is inference, however reasonable, not evidence of the fossils. Gradualism was never seen in the rocks." That was Stephen Jay Gould who said that. And he was saying that basically because he was proposing another solution to the problem of the lack of transitions that Darwin had predicted. And he was proposing what's now called punctuated equilibrium, saying basically that evolution occurs in isolated groups of creatures very quickly or relatively quickly, and is not observable in the fossils for that reason, because it happens in a very small area and it's very unlikely to be preserved. And that was his suggestion to the solution to the problem of where are all the fossils that we would expect to find if evolution was true. And now jumping forward to 2002, again talking about the fossil record. Quote from another famous evolutionist: "Given the fact of evolution," well, we could discuss that perhaps, "one would expect the fossils to document steady change from ancestral forms to descendants. But this is not what the paleontologist finds. New types often appear quite suddenly, and their immediate ancestors are absent from the earlier geological strata. The discovery of unbroken series of species changing gradually into descending species is very rare. Not non-existent, very rare. Indeed, the fossil record is one of discontinuities, seemingly documenting jumps, saltations from one type of organism to a different type." That's Ernest Mayr, who wrote this in 2002 in a book called What Evolution Is. On page 16 of that book, a very revealing quote. He admits there's still a problem. We still have very little evidence for the kind of gradual transitions that we expect. But he does go on to say, and to be fair to him, he goes on to say there are some examples that he quotes which he thinks demonstrates that there are actually transitional fossils. And he quotes the therapsids transitioning to mammals, Archaeopteryx, whale evolution, human evolution even. And I've spoken previously at this group on human evolution and whales. I've mentioned bird evolution as well, but we'll look again at Archaeopteryx actually. And the subject of therapsids to mammals is a very fascinating one, which will be left till later. I haven't got time to cover that today. So, three different evolutionists quoted for you to demonstrate that actually their expectations are not met when they look at the fossil record, which is quite interesting. But they do say there is some evidence, and I'm going to look at that evidence as the evening goes on. But just now to have a quick look at the fossil record, basically we're talking about rocks, different layers of rocks, and there are three main eras of rocks in which the fossils are found. Most of the fossils are only found in these types of rocks, divided up into 15 periods or series, depending on how you divide them up, different schemes for dividing them up. And here's a representation of the geological column, if you like, showing these three eras. There's the Paleozoic, which means ancient life. There's the Mesozoic, the middle life, and the Cenozoic. And each period has characteristic fossils, which help us to recognize which interval of time we're looking at. And this is a very useful system, which was actually pretty much worked out before Darwin had written his book, Origin of Species. But these represent the last 500 million years of geological time. And below that, there are very few fossils, although the Precambrian rocks do have a few fossils. So that's an overview of where we find the fossils. And I want to think briefly about patterns that we see in the fossil record, a different representation of the geological column. And here we have the black lines of different widths are various large major groups of creatures, phylums or phyla or classes or orders of creatures, as we find them in the fossil record. And some fossils are found all throughout the geological period, like, for example, the Brachiopods, or the bacteria. The big one in the middle is the bacteria. Somebody said actually we're still in the age of bacteria. We've always been in the age of bacteria, and we'll always be in the age of bacteria because they're the most predominant life form on this planet. Interesting. That was Stephen Jay Gould, by the way. Interesting perspective. But there are, of course, some that we recognize quite readily, like the trilobites here, which appeared for a short period of time, or relatively short period of time. The trilobites appeared in the Cambrian, disappeared by the Permian. And we have the placoderms, very interesting group of fish, which are now extinct. But some of the earliest fish were placoderms. But they lived mainly during the Devonian times. And we have the dinosaurs, of course, which were Mesozoic life. They existed pretty much during the Mesozoic period, although predominantly actually in the Cretaceous. And most of the really interesting dinosaurs were actually not Jurassic. So Jurassic Park and all that is a load of rubbish, by the way. It should be Cretaceous Park. But obviously the people in Hollywood didn't think it had quite the same ring to it, so they called it Jurassic Park. But that's a little aside. So basically what we're seeing here is we have different groups of animals, different types of animals appearing, and then some disappearing, and some spreading out into larger groupings of animals. And we also find in the fossil record at least 4 what are called mass extinction events, where for some reason unknown, or sometimes they think they have some pointers as to why this was, there's a large number of creatures are wiped out by a mass extinction event. The first one was in the Devonian period. The second one was in the end of the Permian, which wiped out the rest of the trilobites, finished off the trilobites. There's another mass extinction in the Triassic, early on in the Mesozoic era, and another major extinction event in the Cretaceous, which wiped out the dinosaurs. So what we're seeing actually is a pattern of appearance, and then stasis, where things sort of pretty much continue as they were for a while, and then extinction. And that's what you find in the fossil record. And I want to explore a little bit this fact of appearance. In fact, what we're finding is, in fact, sudden appearance of different groups of animals. And I could pick any number of different groupings of animals to try to illustrate this, and I've just picked one, the ichthyosaurs, which are basically marine reptiles that existed approximately the same time as the dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. And they appear in the fossil record all of a sudden, with actually no intermediates and no ancestors. And here's a couple of fossil pictures of ichthyosaurs. The one on the bottom right there is remains of something called Eutatsiosaurus, which is put forward as actually a transition from land-living reptiles to the marine ichthyosaurs, but in fact it's fully marine, it's got flippers. It has some features which are considered to be a little less advanced than some of the later ichthyosaurs, but essentially you wouldn't know the difference looking at it superficially, and the differences are fairly minor, and it doesn't really qualify as a transition because it's fully adapted to its aquatic mode of life. Another group of animals that appear very suddenly in the fossil record are the dinosaurs themselves. And when you start doing research into dinosaurs, you say, well, what was the first dinosaur? Where did it come from? What kind of evidence do we have for the transition of dinosaurs from the early reptiles? If dinosaurs are reptiles, that's a debatable point. Well, there's Eoraptor, dawn thief, I think that translates as, was considered to be, if not the first dinosaur, one of the first dinosaurs, one of the early dinosaurs. The astonishing thing about this creature is that it doesn't look like what you would expect. If you wanted to predict a dinosaur ancestor that was the ancestor, the grandfather, if you like, of all dinosaurs, you wouldn't predict something like Eoraptor. It's bipedal for a start, which is rather unusual. So it actually has advanced features already as one of the early dinosaurs. Like it's bipedal, and it has three-fingered hands, typical of theropods, which were much later in the story of fossils, generally speaking. So when the Eoraptor was found and put forward as an early dinosaur, it caused a few surprises in the evolutionary circles because it wasn't what was expected. So we get sudden appearance of different groups of creatures. But let's think about transitional fossils, because this is where the debate gets really important, because we need to have a clear idea of what's going on here about transitional fossils. And I wanted to take a step back here and say, okay, what do we mean by a transitional fossil? What do we mean by a transitional creature? What kind of things would we expect if we want to work from first principles rather than just sort of jumping in and looking at fossils? What kind of things in biology could we look at which will help us to understand what a transitional fossil might look like? Well, one example is a frog. Frogs, as you know, start off as tadpoles, no legs. And they're missing several other features as well. They're basically swimming around in the pond like a rather odd-looking fish, but not very much like a fish at all, really. But they have no legs, a large tail, and swimming around. But after a few weeks, they start to grow legs, so they're transiting from a creature with no legs, swimming around in the pond, to a creature which has 4 legs, and the tail gradually gets shorter and disappears until you end up with a frog. Now, that is a transition from tadpole to frog. So this giving us, we're looking for a kind of model, a biological model to guide us when we're looking at transitional fossils. It gives us an idea of what we should be looking for. Another example is barnacles. Barnacles are a very interesting creature. You've almost certainly walked all over them, and you probably thought they were just mollusks, but they're not mollusks. Barnacles start off looking somewhat like this. This is one stage in the barnacle lifestyle. It's basically a free-swimming larval stage that swims around in the sea like a very small fish, well, not even like a very small fish, but a very small swimming creature, swims around and ends up settling down on a rock and turning into these things, barnacles all over the rock. So here we have another transition which actually we can observe in biology, which gives us an indication of what we might expect when we're looking for transitional fossils. But the last example I've got is perhaps the most interesting. It's a flatfish. Now, if you know anything about flatfishes, and this is an example of the summer flounder, thanks to P.Z. Myers. I don't know whether this is actually his picture, but I've copied it off his website, so I'm crediting him with it because he didn't credit anyone else. So anyway, here we have a picture of the summer flounder as a larval stage, small, almost microscopic at this stage when it first hatches out of the egg. And as time goes on, it gradually transforms, grows larger, and starts to change shape from being sort of normal fish shape to becoming flatter. And most importantly, the eyes move round, so instead of having an eye on each side of its head, it has both eyes on one side and it turns into a flatfish. And here we have another biological transition which we can actually observe taking place in nature. So if we're looking for fossils to demonstrate how the early fishes turned into flatfishes, we have some indication of how it would work here. And this is a very interesting example because last year, 2008, there was an article in Nature about this creature called Heteronectes, the first a transitional stage from ordinary fish to flatfish, published by Mr. Friedman in Nature. There's the reference for you if you want to look it up. And here we have a diagram of the fish showing both sides. And as you can see, the eyes are in different places. On one side, the eye is more or less in the normal place. On the other side, the eye is very near the top, but not on the other side. There's an eye on each side, but it's asymmetric. The orbit region of the skull is strongly asymmetrical, as the author said. And what's most remarkable is that it hasn't completely gone round to one side, but it looks fairly like an ordinary flatfish except for that. And here we have an intermediate stage between normal fish and flatfish in the fossil record. And you can try and argue about it, but if you look at the report, it seems to be a fairly good example of a transitional form, and I'm going to accept that as a transitional form. And basically, you can look at the modern flatfish and modern fishes that exist, which are flattish, like the examples that are given by Friedman in his paper. There's Trachinotus, which is a living fish on the left-hand side. There's the fossil Heteronectes. In fact, they had two different fossils which had the same features. They're both given there. One is Amphisteum. And then you've got Testoides and Cytharsus, which are living flatfish. As you can see here, the fossil has one eye moving upwards on its way over the top, but this is an adult fish. You can actually look at the way the bones are formed, you can be pretty sure that it's an adult fish. You can also look at the way the skull was fossilized and work out whether it's actually been damaged in the process or whether it was naturally like that. And the conclusion is it was actually, this is what it looked like as an adult. And then we have two modern species, one of which is not quite, the eyes on the same side, both eyes on the same side, one's not as far across as the other. So you get different varieties of flatfish. And it seems to be a fairly good example of an evolutionary transition. And I'm going to say, if that's evolution, I'm an evolutionist, you know. But it's actually not that much of a case for evolution, because we still have a fish. And it seems perfectly reasonable to think that the fish could change from being an ordinary fish, a bit like a perch, to become a flatfish by some slow, gradual transition. Well, in fact, it's quite quick. But the important point here is there's no new features being added. Nothing new is being added to the fish. You've just rearranged what's there, given it a selective advantage to survive, so it can sit at the bottom of the sea and attack what comes by and hide away from its enemies. And you have a new variety of the same kind of animal. But the problem gets much more acute when you're actually looking for major transitions. If you're actually looking at transitions between major groups, there's actually a lack of transitional fossils. And here I have a diagram which illustrates that, showing how we have major groups of animals. Here we have about a dozen different phyla of animals. And if you look around for fossils, transitions to each stage, you don't find them. So just take one branch of this tree. Here you don't find any transitional fossils, neither where the other arrows are. You don't find transitional fossils at these various node points where you'd expect them to transit from one type to another, or at least to be an intermediate between one type and another. These fossils do not exist. So when you look at a large scale and you ask the kind of question, well, okay, where's the evidence that a bat and a sponge are related to each other? Well, in the fossils there is none. So when we're dealing with large scale changes, the fossil record is not much help. And now the evolutionists might say, well, of course, because fossils are rare. Well, my reply to that is, well, if you can actually pick out a very small transition like the flatfish, which happened in a very short period of time, why can't you pick out at least some of the big ones? Well, that question remains to be answered. Maybe tomorrow they will find some transitions. Science is moving forward, and I admit that, no problem. But at the moment, as things stand, we don't have the fossils that show these large-scale changes from one form to another. And this diagram is actually another way of illustrating the Cambrian explosion. The Cambrian explosion is called the Cambrian explosion because over a period of between about 5 and 10 million years, according to the evolutionist, all of the phyla in the fossil record appeared at more or less the same time. The phyla are actually the large groupings of animals, biological groupings. And this took place about 500 million years ago. So what we have here is all the various phyla, except for one actually, but that one was a bit late, it's only about 10 million years later, that appeared as well. So what we find is that there's a massive explosion of life, and you look for the ancestors, you look for the transitions between the different forms, and you don't find them. Another example of a very important transition that you would like to see in the fossil record if you're going to argue for evolution is the evolution of a jaw. Where did jaws come from? Well, we don't know. What we have in the fossil record is creatures very much like the modern lamprey today. Lampreys have a mouth. They have a kind of teeth, but they don't actually have teeth and jaws as you would find in ordinary fish. For example, the placoderms. So fish and all other invertebrates have jaws and teeth, and one of the earliest types of fish was a placoderm. There's a picture of one here, which has jaws and teeth. And the problem is this transition from a creature with no jaws to a creature with jaws and teeth, there's no transition. It's a sudden change. So you just suddenly find creatures like the placoderm with jaws. So where's the evidence in the fossils for that change? There is none. Where are the transitional fossils is a question I would ask the evolutionist, and until they come up with them, I think they have to be very careful to claim that there is good evidence for that transition. The only good evidence they have is genetic. We can discuss that later if you like. But as far as the fossils are concerned, there's a blank. There's a sudden change, sudden appearance of fish with jaws. Well, we can't talk about transitional fossils without talking about Archaeopteryx, of course. Archaeopteryx is one of the jewels in the crown of the evolutionists. They say here we have something that's transitional. And in fact, it was discovered, the first Archaeopteryx was discovered about 10 years after Darwin wrote his book. So the Darwinists were very happy to find an Archaeopteryx. And here's a picture of one of the fossils, and you can quite clearly see there are feathers, there are wings, there's a nice long tail. And this is often cited, as I say, as proof that birds evolved from reptiles. The only problem is, it's not a transition between a reptile and a bird. It is actually a bird with reptilian features. Okay, it has the features that basically define a bird. It has wings, it has asymmetrical flight feathers, it has the flow-through lung system, it has a brain like a bird with all the enlarged regions of the brain that birds have that allow them to fly in three-dimensional space, which can control their wings, has perching feet. So what we have here is a bird with reptilian features, basically teeth. The skull is fairly reptilian, it's got a tail like a reptile, but it's not transiting from reptile to bird. It's a creature that is a mixture, a mosaic if you like, and we'll come back to this, of various features, but it is definitely a bird, it could definitely fly. And while we're on birds and the fossil evidence for bird evolution, I want to just point out some of the problems with the story about birds evolving from dinosaurs. When we say birds evolving from dinosaurs, we're talking about theropod dinosaurs because that's the current theory. And there are 5 problems with this theory. One is to do with age, the relative ages of the fossils. The dinosaurs struck most closely similar to birds are quite recent, at basically 80 million to 110 million years, whereas Archaeopteryx is about 145 million years. So the Archaeopteryx is too old. If you're putting forward the theropod dinosaurs as ancestors of Archaeopteryx, they're too young. They didn't appear till later. And in fact, there are no bird-like dinosaurs in the lower Jurassic and Triassic where you'd expect to find them. that can qualify as ancestors of birds. The next problem is with the fingers. The 3 digits of the hand of the theropod dinosaurs are actually 1, 2, and 3. They're missing these 2, 1, 2, and 3. And the birds, they've got 2, 3, and 4. Quite difficult to do. 2, 3, and 4. There's very good evidence to suggest to show that. So you have a problem. If your theropod dinosaur had fingers 1, 2, and 3, and your birds have fingers 2, 3, and 4, either you have to go backwards or you have to make some fairly big changes. So that's not consistent with the story that theropods evolved into birds. The next problem is the teeth. Archaeopteryx has teeth. It's a toothed bird. But it's not got teeth like a theropod. Theropod teeth are actually curved and flattened and have serrated edges. Archaeopteryx teeth are just like pegs. Not at all like theropod teeth. Next problem is the shoulders. To be a bird to fly, you have to have large wings and quite strong muscles to move your wings up and down. And if you look at the shoulder and the attachment of the arms or the wings to a theropod and compare it with the wings attached to the shoulder of a bird, the structures are all wrong. In fact, the theropods tended to have front arms that were becoming smaller and shorter and less powerful, whereas the birds, of course, your arms are getting longer and more powerful so you can fly. So it's going the wrong way. And the last one is a problem of aerodynamics. Most of the experts who've looked into this, looked at the aerodynamics of birds and flight, consider that it's almost impossible to go from the ground up. You have to be a creature living in a tree and start to glide, a bit like, if you like, the flying squirrel or other flying mammals who basically glide. They jump out of a tree and they fly, or they don't fly, they glide. So there are 4 main problems for the story of birds evolving from dinosaurs. It's not me that's saying this. This is Ernst Mayr again in his book, What Evolution Is. He's actually saying, look, this is the big reason why the story of dinosaurs to birds doesn't work. So he's not saying it didn't happen. He's not saying that birds didn't evolve. He says, well, yes, I believe birds evolved, but I haven't got any fossils to show you how it happened. So that's the situation with birds. But of course, if you've been following the story with the fossils, the big story is the tetrapods. How did we end up with 4 limbs? If you're a human being, 2 arms, 2 legs. If you're any other, well, most of the vertebrates have 4 limbs. So we're talking about tetrapods, animals with 4 limbs. The earliest tetrapod was a creature called Acanthostega, and here's a picture of him. Interesting sort of newt-like creature. It wasn't very newt-like because he was about, if I remember correctly, over 1 meter long, so quite large. And this is the earliest tetrapod that we find in the fossil record. And the story at the moment goes that there is a creature called Tiktaalik, who was a transition from a creature like Panderichthys, who was basically a transition from very fish-like animal called Eusthenopteron. Now these pictures look quite good, but you have to remember they are pictures, they are reconstructions based on fossil evidence. And you have to be careful sometimes because when you're looking to demonstrate evolution, you can make your creatures look a bit more like a tetrapod than perhaps they ought to be. And to just illustrate that, I'm going to actually look at some of the evidence in a bit of detail for this particular transition. So Tiktaalik was published in Nature in 2006. Here's the title of the paper, The Pectoral Fin of Tiktaalik rosei and the Origin of the Tetrapod Limb, written by Shubin and his colleagues in 2006. And they produced some interesting work, and it's a nice diagram of their evolution of the tetrapod limb. In fact, the front limb, because we're talking about the front fin, the pectoral fin. And here we have our 4 creatures. Here's the fish, here's Panderichthys and Tiktaalik and Acanthostega. And you can see the reconstruction of the bones of the fins. This variety of fish had bones in their fins arranged in different ways. And if you look where the circles are, you can see that Panderichthys has nothing beyond a few sort of stubs of bone, whereas Tiktaalik has got little bits sticking off the end of a bone called the ulnar, not the ulna, the ulnar. And it's suggested that these are the beginning of fingers in the tetrapod limb, or toes, if you're walking around on all 4s. So that was 2006, and I've done a few diagrams to illustrate this with a bit more detail. Here is Eusthenopteron, and here we have Acanthostega. And in the middle, we had up until recently you had Panderichthys, and in 2006 Tiktaalik came in and nicely filled the gap between Panderichthys and Acanthostega. So you can actually see, if you look at the ulnar bone, which is the purple one, you can see it gets a bit smaller when you move to Panderichthys, and it gets even smaller in Tiktaalik, and it almost disappeared in Acanthostega. And here you have the bones which were suggested could be evolving towards the fingers. So, quite a nice story. Until December this year, when somebody called Boisvert, or if you're English, Greenwood, published endoskeleton of the pectoral fin of Panderichthys, and I call this Panderichthys punches back, because suddenly Panderichthys has changed its status, because this team led by Madame Boisvert, she did a few CT scans, and she discovered that actually on the end we have some smaller bones, which you can see here edge on, and right next to it you can see from the view from the side, and suggested that these small bones were actually what was going to be evolving into digits. But please note, that's why I've got the side view here, a copy from the paper that's published in Nature. These are flat bones. They're plate-like bones all the way through the fin. They're not cylindrical like your finger bones. Our finger bones, our digits and our toes are cylindrical. So these are flat bones inside the fin, stiffening the fin. So things have changed as recently as December last year. And here we have the diagrams from the same paper with the same 4 species of creature. And note now that Panderichthys has somewhat changed the picture. And if you compare the 2 diagrams from 2006 to 2008, some very interesting things come out. Now look particularly here where the red circles are. In 2006, Panderichthys looked fairly un-tetrapod-like, and now in 2008 it looks much more tetrapod-like, and this large ulnar was actually broken up into smaller parts when they analysed it more carefully using a CT scan. So it's kind of a cautionary tale, because you get something published and it looks good, it fits in a nice story, and suddenly somebody comes along and reanalyzes gets another fossil, has a look at it a bit more closely, and the story changes. And if you go back to the diagrams of the fins of these fish, or these creatures, you have here the transition again, and Tiktaalik is there next to Acanthostega, and Panderichthys in the middle here. And this is the new data from Panderichthys, with these plate-like bones which have been separated out, teased out if you like, from the ulnar. And now the ulnar, instead of going in a nice smooth transition, it gets smaller, then it gets bigger again. So you might wonder, actually, if they're out of order. Now, there's reasons why you could argue that Tiktaalik belongs closer to Acanthostega, because it has actually got features which are not usually found in the fish, but are found in tetrapods, like, for example, it has a neck, which fish don't have, not as such. A fish cannot move the head independently of the body. It's basically stuck to the body. They can twist around a bit, but they don't have a neck like we do, move your head from side to side, hold your body still. And Tiktaalik could do that. But as Boisvert actually admits in her paper, it complicates the picture somewhat. There's no smooth transition now from the fish to the tetrapod. And more importantly, we're talking about tetrapods here. Up until now, I've been talking about the pectoral fins, the front legs. So we'll be looking at the fins and looking at the front legs of Acanthostega. What about the back legs? Here's a diagram again from Nature in April 2006, which accompanied the article about Tiktaalik. A nice evolutionary transition marked out for us, diagrammatically from the fossil evidence, but look at the back legs. I've blown up actually Acanthostega and Tiktaalik to point out that here we have a back leg, which has got lots of bones which you would expect to find in the rear leg of a tetrapod, and here you have the fin of Tiktaalik. So evolution seems to have forgotten the back end. So only the front end is evolving. There's actually still a massive difference between these fish-like creatures with rather stronger fins than you would normally expect on a fish, and tetrapods. And this is rather important, because what we've got here actually is we've got a group of creatures that have been called fishopods, so a mixture between a fish and a tetrapod, but again, a bit like Archaeopteryx, they're a mosaic. They're not on the way to becoming anything, at least I would argue they're not on the way to becoming anything. So you have a group of creatures which have been called fishopods, which basically are fish with strong pectoral fins, the pectoral being the front fins, and they are actually also, well, we don't know about the creatures that the fossils. We can make a few assumptions, but we don't know they could breathe there. But there are actually fissiopods around today that have strong pectoral fins and can breathe air and actually move around on land. One of them is the mud skipper, which lives in Indonesia. Very small, very cute little creature that runs around, quite difficult to catch apparently. And they, as you can see in that picture, is kind of perched up on its front fin, on its pectoral fin. Another one is the bishir, which is in Africa. And again, this one can get up and crawl around on land. It actually has lungs. It actually can breathe air like an air-breathing tetrapod. But it isn't a tetrapod, it's a fishopod. It's got fins which are stiffened, which allow it to stand up. And it has a lifestyle much like that proposed for creatures like Acanthostega and Tiktaalik. So here what I would suggest to you is we have another example, like Archaeopteryx, of a mosaic fossil, or a chimera. Chimera based on the mythical fire-breathing monster, which is a mixture of a lion, a goat, and a serpent, or a snake. And there are a number of creatures which fit this description. Basically, they're a mixture of features, like the fishopod, like Tiktaalik, like the therapsids, actually, the mammal-like reptiles. They're not reptiles, they're not mammals, but they have features of both. And reptile-like birds, like Archaeopteryx. And possibly also feathered dinosaurs. And there again, the jury's still out on feathered dinosaurs. Were they really feathered or were they not? There's a bit of debate still about that. And there is one living example of a mosaic creature, and that is the platypus that we all know, which is has a mixture of features, some reptilian, some mammalian. So there are creatures around. There have been creatures in the fossil record which we could classify as mosaic fossils. But the important thing about them is, well, I don't believe they are transitional. Basically because, this is why I gave you the example of the tadpole and the barnacle and flatfish, you get a gradual change from one type into another to be a truly transitional. You have to have something you start from, you've got a midway point or several midway points and a finished article. And the problem with a lot of the transitions, you don't have that, you can't show that sequence. You certainly can't show it with Archaeopteryx. And then you get the mosaic creatures, which actually are a mixture of characters, where you have Archaeopteryx, which has bird-like characters. It has fully developed feathers. It has wings. It breathes like a bird. It flies like a bird. But then it also has a tail like a reptile and a skull like a reptile. But it's not on the way, it's not a transition between a reptile and a bird, because the features that you find that are reptilian are fully reptilian. The features you find that are bird-like are fully bird-like. And the same could probably be said of the fishopods. So I would actually argue that there are no good transitions for the large changes that you would expect evolutionists to be able to point to. Let's move on. I want to consider advanced features in fossils, because people come up to me and say, well, what about, why don't we ever see modern creatures in the old rocks? You know, if you're a creationist, you don't believe the rocks are that old anyway, so we'd expect to find modern animals in old rocks. Well, it rather depends on what you mean by modern, and what you mean by advanced, and what you mean by primitive, which is why I put advanced in quotes there, because we can't be too sure. But under this section, I want to look at two creatures. One is the Trilobite, the good old Trilobite that lived 500, 400 million years ago, and another one, which is a Devonian fish, is actually a placoderm, both of which had rather advanced features. First, the Trilobite, and here's the Trilobites had amazing eyes. They basically had calcitic compound eyes made out of calcite. And here's a picture of Redops, and its eye is composed of lots of small lenses with a doublet structure, which allows it to have sharply focused images without actually changing the shape of the lens. So it's got two different densities of calcite put together to make a lens that focuses accurately. And this is an incredibly advanced bit of optics, and optical scientists can make lenses that are equivalent to the Trilobite lenses. But remember, this creature appeared from nowhere 500 million years ago and had very advanced eyes. So here is a creature which is essentially your modern fossil in an old rock, if you're going to put it in an evolutionary time frame. The other one that I want to look at is Metaphyses attenboroughi, this was published in Nature 2008, again quite recently. But just before we get there, most fish lay eggs, as you know, but actually quite a lot of fish give birth to live young. The sharks and the rays give birth to live young. They don't lay eggs, so the young are born swimming around. And this is considered to be an advanced feature. You know, you don't start off, laying an egg is much easier than actually having a baby fish grow inside you. You need a lot more plumbing, as it were, and here's a diagram of what you need. And here, this is actually a diagram from Nature in 2008, showing you what they found, a reconstruction of what they found, and what they found was that in a 380 million year old fish, they had what appears to be uterus with an embryo attached by an umbilical cord to a yolk sac. And this is essentially what you find in modern sharks. But remember, this is 380 million years ago. So we seem to have, again, a very modern creature in some old rocks. Metaphyses was basically a modern fish in the Devonian era, when you didn't expect to find them. So I would suggest that actually, when we look at the fossil record, we find advanced features unexpectedly against the predictions of the evolutionists. We're going to come back to that later, though. I just want to spend a bit of time thinking about living fossils, basically examples of morphological stasis. That was mentioned by some of the evolutionists I quoted earlier. Basically, when we talk about morphology, we're talking about the shape of the body, also the way the bits and pieces that are attached, and how they're attached, and the way the animal is basically put together, the body plan, if you like. So let's have a look at some living fossils. Now, I could spend a long time talking about living fossils, because there are so many living fossils. Here we have our geological column again with the evolutionary timescale from about 500 million years upwards. And we have many different living fossils. Here is one, was in the news today, I saw. Maybe not on the television, but on the internet anyway. And we have a tree, we have a couple of fish, and another creature with a shell. Well, let's go through some of these. First one is Wollemi Pine. The Wollemi Pine, we're told, can be found as a fossil 100 million years ago. And it's in Australia, recently discovered in Australia, thought to be an extinct species of pine. It's equivalent, basically, of finding a dinosaur wandering around in your back garden. And here's a pine tree, which, according to the traditional interpretation, has been extinct for 100 million years. And here is the tuatara, which is in the news today, is one 111 years old, just fathered a brood of babies, with, I think the mother was 80 years old. So, quite good, really, for what essentially is a living fossil. Hasn't changed in 150 million years. It's a very odd creature, the only one left of its kind. It has some very interesting features, including a very pronounced third eye and a number of unique features which only it has. But it is essentially a living fossil. It has not changed significantly in 150 million years. Another one is the cockroach. It's been around for about 200 or 300 million years, depending which species you look at, and some of them are very big. So the cockroach, again, is another living fossil. Perhaps the most well-known one is the Coelacanth, supposedly been around for 300 million years and considered to be extinct for about 100 million years, and then rediscovered in the Indian Ocean, swimming around. Well, it's actually rediscovered in the marketplace because people were eating it for supper. Interestingly, the coelacanth is quite interesting because it was considered at one time to be the best candidate for a transition from a fish to a tetrapod, until they found a live one and looked at actually how it was put together, and all of a sudden it didn't work. So that's an interesting story all on its own, which I haven't got time to go into. But it did prove, again, that some of the theories put forward were wrong. Another one is a horseshoe crab. About 300 million years, the horseshoe crab has been around. It's not actually a crab. It's a bit like a crab, but biologically speaking, it's not a crab. Has 5 pairs of legs and 10 pairs of eyes, breathes through gills, but it's not a crab. But it's been around for about 300 million years. Then we have Nautilus, my favourite. Nautilus is a wonderful jet-propelled submarine, and they've been around for about 400 to 500 million years, essentially unchanged. There have been small changes, but basically it's the same creature. And the Brachiopod. Brachiopods are very interesting creatures. They've been around for about 500 million years, and you can still find them on the beach, otherwise known as lamp shells. And it's interesting because 99% of all brachiopods are both fossil and living, which is quite interesting. So we have an endless succession of creatures which basically haven't evolved. Now that's not necessarily a problem for evolution, I admit, because evolution can cope with stasis. But it's not a prediction that was made by the evolutionists right at the beginning. It's not a prediction you would expect. So living fossils are an interesting counterintuitive find when it comes to evolution, if you're an evolutionist. So I just want to summarize where we are up to now before getting on to something a bit more technical. What we find is sudden appearance without transition. We find advanced features in what are essentially, evolutionary speaking, very, very old creatures. We also find mosaic creatures, creatures that are a combination of different types, like the platypus alive today, or like the Archaeopteryx. And we find long-term stasis, in other words, living fossils that have been around for millions and hundreds of millions of years. But we do find minor changes, and the flatfish is quite a good one, and I think it's probably the most convincing argument that an evolutionist has at the moment of a transition from one type of fish to another. Okay, let's talk about disparity and diversity. Disparity, what I'm talking about here is lots of different types. When I'm talking about types, I'm talking about the level of the phylum or the class or the order. So large groupings of animals, like, for example, vertebrates, a phyla, or arthropods, which include insects, which include spiders, crabs, similar creatures. So if you go the big picture, look at large groupings of animals, disparity means how many different phyla have we got, how many different classes of animal or orders of animal do we have. And for example, you think about a bird, a mammal, or a reptile might be that kind of level. These will be bird and mammal will be class or order level. Diversity, we're thinking about lots of variations within one type. Like, for example, lots of species, dogs, swallowtail, butterflies, for example. Lots of different species, but they're essentially a butterfly or a dog. So, you've got those fixed in your mind. Let's have a look at what the fossil record shows us, what the evolutionists would predict, and think about what the creationists might predict. Well, what we find in the fossil record, if we put numbers against geological eras on the bottom there, the Cambrian, the end Paleozoic, and the end Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic, basically in the Cambrian you have about 60 different phyla, and now we have about 30 odd different phyla. So there's been a decrease in disparity in large groupings of animals. So actually we're less diverse in one sense, but less disparate is the word we want to keep in our mind. And if you look at diversity, it goes the other way. So what you had initially was you had lots of different basic types, not so many species, generally speaking. This is very approximate. Depends what level you look at. Now we have less variety in one sense, less disparity, but a lot more diversity within that grouping. So you have lots of different butterflies, if you like. But we've lost major groups of creatures. Just to illustrate this, some extinct phyla or classes of orders that we no longer have on Earth today, which we had at one time. Plachioderms, these are strange-looking fish, some of which had advanced features, as we noticed. Therapsids is another one. Dinosaurs is a very good example of a type or a class or an order of animal that no longer exist. The fissiopods don't exist anymore, although there's some creatures that are remarkably similar, but I don't think they could be claimed to be the same. Ichthyosaurs, pterosaurs, feathered dinosaurs perhaps. I'll put a question mark by that one. The reptile-like birds, Archaeopteryx, and a dozen Cambrian phyla, the highest level. They've disappeared. So we have a decrease in disparity but increase in diversity within the groups that remain. And that's what we observe in the fossil record. So I'm just going to finish off now with predictions. Now, I want to ask the question, and I'm going to leave it unanswered. Well, partially. You can press me on it later if you like. Which theory predicts long-term morphological stasis in the fossil record? Which theory predicts mass extinctions? Which theory would predict advanced features at any time in the geological record? And which theory would predict decreasing disparity but increasing diversity in the fossil record? Now, one of the failures of neo-Darwinism, and this was written by an evolutionist, was that it's actually failed to predict the widespread long-term morphological stasis in the fossil record. It also failed to predict mass extinctions. If you're a uniformitarian geologist, there's no reason to expect mass extinction during geological time because everything goes slowly and gradually. So you wouldn't expect to wipe out whole classes of creature like we have found. Although now, of course, geology is adapting to the recognition of the fact that there have been mass extinctions. But it wasn't a prediction that initially would have been made by an evolutionist. And in fact, 4 out of 5 of those would not be predicted by evolutionists. But all of them, could be argued, would be predicted by a creationist. And there I have finished all that I wish to say. So, time now for questions.